We call it Expedition Truth. And we know you're going to love it. You ready now?
Somewhere, among the many competing voices in the world, truth is just waiting to be discovered. So sit back, open your mind to a world beyond your imagination. A world where truth never fears questions. Welcome to Expedition Truth with your host, Jack Ashcraft.
And welcome to tonight's program. I'm glad you decided to join us. And I hope you've had a good week so far. We are here on Friday Eve. And hopefully you've been able to avoid as much of the politics as you can. It can really be disconcerting. So it's always good if you can spend some time with your family, unplug from the political mess that our world is in today, and focus on what is important, family and faith. Our guest tonight is, I hope it's going to be an interesting program, because I think that the topic we're going to discuss tonight is one that there really isn't a lot of solid information out there on. And I think even what information is out there tends to be misunderstood, misconstrued, and abused for various purposes. And so I wanted to have my guest on because he is I'm going to guess the top authority that we could tap into regarding this topic. My guest tonight is a successful leader of the Al-Shatru Folk Assembly. And he has opened what are called HOFs, two of them under his leadership, one in North Carolina and one in Minnesota. And along with Odenshof in California, those temples stand as the first of their kind dedicated to I'm going to try this again. So if I mispronounce this, I apologize to everybody who is an adherent to this faith, as well as my guest. It's the first of their kind dedicated to the ICER in North America. With him at the helm, the AFA has boasted not only drastic increase in membership numbers, but also the number and quality of national events throughout the United States and Europe, giving folkish Al-Shatruar opportunities to gather in worship of their gods and fellowship with communities where there had been none before. My guest tonight is Matthew Flavel. Matthew, welcome to the program.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on tonight.
Now, Matthew, I don't want you to think I'm trying to disrespect you by not using your clerical title. I just wouldn't be able to pronounce that to save my life.
Not at all. It's the title I got, not one I made up, so I apologize if it's difficult. It's Alsherjar Gothi, which basically means the head Gothi, or the Gothi above the other Gothar. Okay. And a Gothi is a priest in Al-Shatru.
Okay. So sort of like a high priest, sort of.
Yes, sir.
So, okay. I just didn't want to butcher that because I undoubtedly would have. So, Matthew, tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background? Were you raised a Christian or what? And how did you find Al-Shatru?
Well, so I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. My family, I guess, if asked, would have said they were Christian, but there wasn't a lot of Christian raising in my home. We didn't go to church. I think you got to check a box, and that's kind of the box that most people check, or I guess that my grandparents perhaps on both sides were. Mm-hmm. But so we're nominally Christian. I was always a very spiritual person. I felt very spiritual, but I didn't know what to do with that. So my aunt and my cousins were very involved in being a Jehovah's Witness. That was a big part of what they did. And I spent time with them growing up, and I kind of got drawn into that when I was just getting out of high school. And I read my Bible several times through, and Jehovah's Witnesses seemed to have a good grasp of what was going on. So I pursued that for a little bit. But once I was about About 19, I'd say. I had kind of a hard break with that. The teachings in there didn't resonate with me, and at some point I didn't want to be a hypocrite, and I didn't want to claim to believe something I didn't. So I rejected that, and I was still left with this spiritual need. And so I started to think, okay, well, what did my people have before Christianity came to Europe? And knowing about history and knowing about things, I started, I guess, practicing my own proto-Alcitrue, because I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it was an option. I thought I was just by myself. But a pretty quick Google search trying to figure out how to do things, and I thought I was just going to get historical treatises on these things. But I found Stephen McNallen in the Alcitrue Folk Assembly, and there were real people in this day and age practicing this faith, and I was hooked ever since.
So did you find yourself going through, I guess, what they would call New Age or neo-pagan ideas and groups before you found Alcitrue?
Well, I didn't, and it was a little bit different time. This is around 2000, 2001, and there was a little bit more middle ground. But people who tend to refer to themselves as pagan, certainly that's a fine term, but that camp seems to be pretty progressive and far left in their values, and that's polar opposite to where I'm at. So none of that really resonated with me. But the Alcitrue Folk Assembly was kind of markedly different from that, which I found really refreshing.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you. Everything that I've seen when it comes to things like Wicca, for example, most of those people are very much far left. Progressive is a nice term. I would say most cases outright Marxist. And
I agree.
I did a study, probably 10 years ago now, looking into the people who were attracted to Wicca. And I found a study that a university professor had done, and I can't remember his name right now, but in that study, he determined that somewhere upwards of the high 70-odd% of those involved in Wicca were also autistic, somewhere on the autistic spectrum. And I think that's probably very likely as well. At least that's been my experience of meeting people in Wicca. What are the people like that you met in Alcitrue? I mean, you're probably not attracting the same kind of person.
No, not at all. But I think there for a time we did get some overlap in the sense, and the statistic that you pointed out was really interesting, because there's a phenomenon that used to happen in this kind of alternative religions, I guess you'd call it, to where people didn't join because they were Alcitrue or they were Wicca. They joined because they weren't Christian. And so they were joining out of a rejection of the one and not really a positive embracing of the other. And that's really changed around, specifically within the Alcitrue Folk Assembly. We have people who are joining it because they are positively Alcitrue. And that's a different kind of folks. I'd say politically, Alcitrue and the AFA tend to be conservative, socially conservative, traditional minded. I know it may sound odd to say traditional, but traditional in a big sense.
Yeah, capital T.
Yeah, and we have people from all walks of life. I'm really happy to see it. We have people of all ages, a lot of children, all the way up to senior citizens. And there's not really one, line of work or other connecting factor there. It really does seem to be reflections of all our folk across the spectrum of jobs and economy and whatever else.
I would imagine then that family is very important to adherents of your faith then.
Yes, sir. Family is one of the most fundamental things about who we are, how we relate to our gods, and our group is always in a family sense, always in a relationship way, and it's talking about our ancestry. In a way, Alcitrue is ancestor worship. So our family is extremely important.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian, but I would say that honor and respect for our ancestors should be very much a part of our consciousness as Christians. I don't think that we can ignore the contribution of our ancestors, because they bequeath to us anything good in our culture that we have. And I think we need to be constantly reminding ourselves of their contribution to our good. And I'm sure that's something you would agree with.
I could not agree more with that. And I think that the veneration to a degree of our ancestors is something that can appeal across the board to people. No matter what your faith is, you have generations of people that came before you that have allowed you to be here and have the success you have in your life. And whether you believe they live on, and in whatever way you believe they live on, it's the fact that they did exist and that you do owe them quite a bit.
What form does honor of the ancestors take in Al-Shatru?
Most Al-Shatru have an altar in their house, usually a space they set aside that often has pictures of their ancestors. Some of them will have a special altar for the gods and one for their ancestors. But a lot of that comes with making prayers to your ancestors, little offerings of I don't know, a shot of whiskey or some incense. Or one thing that's common at meals, especially on feasts or special meals, is to set aside an ancestor's plate. Some people will even set a special place at the table to be kind of an honorary seat for the ancestors.
Wow, that's interesting. What do you see as well, let me rephrase that. Are the gods literal beings who exist in another realm, or are they symbols? Because you talk to neo-pagans, and I'm not trying to classify you as neo-pagan. I understand you're not. I think you would classify yourselves more as heathen, maybe. Correct?
Yeah, but when you get into semantics, it all depends on where you're at. I think in different parts of the world, it probably means different things.
Okay, all right. I don't want you to feel like I'm classifying you as neo-pagan. I wouldn't do that to my worst enemy.
Thank you.
But you talk to neo-pagans, and you'll get anything from their archetypes to symbols to real beings. What is the Al-Shatru position on that with reference to the gods?
Our gods are absolutely real. They are real beings. They exist. I think that people have a misconception that must mean that they exist in a physical form, exactly like's laid out in the Eddas. I don't think that Thor is a really muscular guy with a red beard. I think that communicates to us truths about Thor. But when I do bloat to Thor, I absolutely know that he hears me and receives that and gives me blessings. I believe very much in our gods.
Okay, I'm glad you mentioned the appearance of Thor, for example, and you said that it tells you things about them. What does it tell you about them specifically?
I think it depends on the god that we're talking about. But one thing in myth, and I think this often gets confused, in the Abrahamic faiths, it's very, very literal with, the divine word of God in their sacred texts. And that's, that is the truth. Ours, myth teaches truth, but it teaches truth through story and through things that exist in mythic time and, not necessarily in chronological time. So the image of our gods tells us, like Thor, for example, his strength, his power, his fury in the storm is symbolized by his fiery red beard and by his flashing eyes and his muscular appearance of power. But that teaches us about that power that's inherent in the god Thor, not drawing a picture of him in a way that our minds can conceive.
Yeah, I think that there is, at least in Eastern mythology, there is, for some of the peoples in the well, the Middle East anyway, Mesopotamia, places like that, you would find that the gods were considered to be the ancestors of the rulers of those peoples. And so is there anything like that in Al-Shatru? Is there any sense in which these gods are considered also to be ancestors?
Absolutely, and that takes a different form. I'm not necessarily suggesting that in the beginnings of time there was some kind of a physical, mating that happened. But what I do say is they're absolutely our ancestors, and they're the progenitors of our folk. We approach them in that way. One of the reasons I said at the top of the program that family is so important to us is that's how we link back with our gods in that sense. Mm-hmm. It's also important, the ruling houses of Europe, even into the Christian period, their kings would often trace their lineage back to Odin. Mm-hmm. And so, in a sense, Odin is the progenitor of royalty in Al-Shatru as well. But in a bigger sense, our gods are all our deepest ancestors.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, you've used the word folk a few times, and I'm sure that some of my listeners are, if they're from Kentucky like I am, that word doesn't mean what I think you mean by that word. What does the word folk actually mean for you?
Folk means race.
Okay.
It doesn't set off as many, alarm bells in certain people's mind, because so many words today have these connotations to them and presumptions about them. It's one of the reasons I try to use the word folk instead, but folk means race.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in philosophy, we have the word ethnos, mm-hmm. and it's the same thing, and basically means, your ethnicity, your background, the people of your common heritage. Yeah, and I can understand why using the word folk might be less incendiary for some, especially in our current climate. Who are the principal gods of Al-Shatru?
Well, you mentioned earlier the Aesir are our principal gods. So that list can be very large, but probably the top of that, or the most frequently worshipped, are Odin, Thor, Freya, the goddess Frigga. We have one of our Hofs is dedicated to Balder. The god Tyr is also very commonly worshipped, but we have quite a few gods and goddesses that we give worship to.
Is there a hierarchy of gods?
I suppose in a very simple way. Odin is the chief of the gods, so in that way he's at the top of that hierarchy. He's also the father of the gods. He's the All-Father. But below that, there's not really a structured hierarchy between the other gods that sit in his council. Mm-hmm.
Now, again, I'm coming at this from a Abrahamic theological construct, because that's where my education lies as an Anglican priest. But we have the concept of God being eternally self-existent, immanent and transcendent, omniscient, etc., all of the omnis. Is it the same for the Aesir?
It's not, and I think that's one thing that adds a different dimension to Al-Shatru than maybe other people are used to. Our gods struggle. So much of our mythos is played out in the struggle between order and chaos, the struggle between the gods and the giants. So our gods have to, and a lot of our symbology represents this, but our gods have to stay in motion. They have to stay vigilant, because there is the possibility that that chaos overtakes. So they always have to stay one step ahead. We don't believe in all of the omnis, as you put it. But that being said, our gods are immensely more powerful than we can conceive. And by saying that, I don't mean to put any limitations on them, but there is a sense that they do have to struggle and contend with things.
Mm-hmm. But are they eternal beings, or?
Yes, and they're inherently connected to us, and I think that in a way, as long as our folk or our race exists, those gods exist and they live through us. I assume that they exist even if we don't, but that severing between us and them would be fundamental break with their existence as we know it.
Mm-hmm. And is there a supreme God or a prime God, one from whom all the others proceed?
I mean, like I say, in a way, in a time before the Aesir, there's the primal giant Ymir, and he's broken up into parts and restructured and reshaped into our world, and that's done by Odin. Mm-hmm. But there's a source of power beyond that would be Ginnungagap, which is the yawning void it's described as, from which creation and, in that sense, magic comes from. Mm-hmm. And so there is that source, but not as a deity. Yeah,
it's not a conscious being then?
No.
Okay. Well, then is the material world a creation of the Aesir, or is it like atheistic evolutionary theory teaches, just the process of natural forces, accident?
I think it's shaping order from chaos. I think there is a natural occurring, random element, but that element has been taken and shaped by our gods into the ordered and beautiful world we have around us.
Mm-hmm. So is there, and I'm sorry if these questions seem simplistic to you, but that would imply that there was pre-existing matter then. Would that pre-existing matter come from this yawning void then that you mentioned?
Yes, as far as our lore indicates, and as far as we can figure, and our gods shaping that into reality that we know is one of the big themes, and something that really affects our conception of the world, is taking disorder, taking chaos, and bending it to our will and shaping it into the things that we want in life.
I see what you're saying. So that would mean that it would be your responsibility, for example, to inculcate and preserve culture.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, I got to take a break here. My guest is Matthew Flavel. We'll be back with more about Al-Shatru.
You're listening to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft.
It's just good, clean fun.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Share your thoughts of the show by calling 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Find us worldwide on Skype at KCOR Radio, or jump into our live chat room at www.kcorradio.com.
Now the world will begin hearing us.
More truth than humanly possible after these brief words from our sponsors.
Monday nights are about to become hauntingly good, as Reverend Sean Whittington possesses the airwaves with Vegas Supernatural. Tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for Vegas Supernatural, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. There's a war raging between good and evil. The question is, which side are you fighting on? Tune in Monday nights as Reverend Sean Whittington sets the new standard for paranormal radio with some of the most influential personalities in the world today. Vegas Supernatural, hosted by Reverend Sean Whittington, every Monday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The one show even the devil doesn't want you to hear.
Thursdays at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, the voice of spirit Come join inspirational clairvoyant, medium, and psychic Leo Bonomo. As he connects you to the other side. The breathtaking 2-hour show will take you on a journey not just through the paranormal, but into the world of mediumship with world-renowned international guests exploring a world of topics relating to anything spiritual.
You're ready to wake up, you're going to wake up. And if you're not ready, you're going to stay pretending that you're just a little, poor little me.
Live Thursday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The Voice of Spirit, hosted by Leo Bonomo.
It is amazing, is it not?
Your connection to spirit is but a show away.
We interrupt this program to annoy you and make things generally irritating.
At the end of the day, we turn the lights down in the KCOR studio.
Oh, sweet.
And crank up the hottest club songs from around the world.
This is the future.
The Grind, mixed by Tina Marie, your Vegas vixen of the high desert.
What about the body? What kind of body?
Good body, nice body.
Every night from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. Pacific. The best 3 hours of commercial-free music.
New music first.
It's time to stand up and dance your ass off. The Grind, nightly and exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Come on, it's kind of hot.
You love them enough to do anything for them.
Mom, I need to be wiped.
Coming.
Including checking nhtsa.gov/the right seat to make sure they're in the right car seat. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Expedition Truth. Expedition Truth.
This place is incredible.
Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. To be on the show live, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230.
What are you waiting for?
Worldwide callers, use Skype name KCOR Radio. Share your thoughts of the show on Twitter at KCOR Radio using hashtag KCOR. Even better, join like-minded individuals in our live chat room at KCORradio.com. Now, back to Expedition Truth with Jack Ashcraft, where the truth never fears questions.
Welcome back to the program. If you just joined us, we've been talking with Matthew Flavel. He is the current leader of the True Folk Assembly, and he's been helping us to understand more about the faith. Before we get back into the conversation, I want to remind my listeners that this program is dependent on your generosity to stay on the air. We don't sell advertisement for this program or on this program. And so all of the costs to air this program come out of my pocket. And if you like the programming you hear on this program and you would like to keep it going, I'd like to ask you to prayerfully consider contributing to the program. You can do a one-time gift at the KCRradio.com website. Right at the bottom of the main page, there's a donation tab there, and you can just mark the one-time donation for Expedition Truth, and it'll get credited to our account. If you want to be a monthly contributor, you can go to expeditiontruth.net or paleoorthodoxy.org. Those are both my websites, and there are links there for my Patreon. You can donate as little as $1 a month to keep the program on the air. And if you're unable to do either one of those, I understand money is tight. None of us is rich. And then I would just ask that you would pray for the program, that we continue to bring you quality programs and quality guests like today's guest. If you're listening on YouTube, please, if you like the program, hit the thumbs up button and share this video so more people hear this. And I'm sure that Matthew would appreciate it if you would as well. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing. All right, let's get back into the program. Matthew, I understand during the break we have quite a few people who like what they hear from you in our chat room.
Well, I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah, so you're apparently pushing the right buttons. So, so let's get into some of the specifics of perhaps some of the ritual. If there's something you can't disclose, I'm not going to ask you to do so. But what are the central rituals of Alshatru?
There's two main ones. Aside from feasting's important. We like to have feast days for our heroes. We like to have eating a meal is very important to any of our gatherings. But that's kind of understood. The other two would be bloat and sumble. So bloat is our interaction with the gods, and most all of our interactions with each other and with the gods is about gift giving. So in bloat, and it depends on the space you're in. Now that we have hofs, it's a little bit different, and sometimes these are done indoors. But when they're done outdoors, which up until very recently, that's what we had. Typically, people will stand in a circle, and I guess the fundamentals of it are the Gothi or whoever's officiating will address the gods and invite them to hear us and to be with us. We'll take a horn of usually mead and we'll take it around the circle, and people will, we like to say, from heart to hand to horn, they'll imbue that with their love, with their thanksgiving, with their loyalty, with whatever good feelings inside that they want to infuse into that horn. And we pass that around the circle and pour that out often to the fire as an offering to the gods. And then we'll ask that if and it depends on who we're worshiping at the time, but we'll ask if the gods appreciate what we're, if they've seen into our hearts and they like what they've seen, if they accept our offering, then would they please pour out their blessings on us? And usually the Gothi will hold aloft a bowl or a horn of mead, a second one. And that will then be distributed around the circle. If it's a small group, people will have a drink. If it's a large group, we'll asperge. But yeah, basically we offer them something of us, our energy, our power, and we ask that in return they give us their blessings or share that with us. And that's the fundamental worship ritual of Alshatru. The other ritual is sumble, and that's a formal sharing of the horn of mead ritual, to where toasts are made. And usually in a high sumble, there are 3 rounds. So the first round would be the round to the gods. So everyone in the circle would, when the horn comes to them, make a toast to one of our gods. The second round is a round for the ancestors. So people will then make a toast to, sometimes, communally, our ancestors or a great hero of our ancestors from the past. But in general, people will raise a toast to one of their personal ancestors, very often a parent or a grandparent that's passed, and tell a little story about them so we remember them collectively and speak their name collectively. And then the third round is the round for the heroes, and it's kind of a freestyle round. Often that's a round where people will recite a poem that they've made for the occasion, or sing a song, or just make a toast to somebody who's, deserves to be acknowledged. The point is that we're acknowledging people in a ritual context there as a group, to where their name is said and celebrated.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking as I was listening to this. This seems to be very much, folk-oriented. Ancestors, the people who are present. It sounds very community-minded, which is good. I think that's a good thing. Unfortunately, I think that's something that is missing in Christianity, especially evangelicalism. It has become such an expression of independent spirituality, my relationship with God, that there's no corporate aspect to spiritual life. But it sounds to me like you very much value the corporate aspect of spiritual life.
We do. I think it's, if anything, it's moving the opposite direction that we've seen Christianity move that way. Mm-hmm. Initially, when I first became involved in House of True, there was a lot of focus on the individual, and there still is. The individual is important, but we really increased the focus on the group. And part of that is we believe there's a synergy that happens, that when you interact in a ritual space, you become worth more than the sum of your parts. So by us celebrating in that sambal all together, if there's 50 people there, the impact of what we're doing is much more than 50 individuals. When 50 are a group, the value is much greater.
Yeah, certainly the collective intention is something that I think most traditional cultures have recognized as an important component of their indigenous religions. I mean, you see that in Shinto and Buddhism and, a whole host of other indigenous religions. So I'm not surprised to see that perennial principle in Al-Shatru. I'd be surprised if it wasn't there, to be frank. So let's talk a little bit about the cultural aspects. How does Al-Shatru inform your the culture of your members? And by that I mean daily life and perhaps social and political principles by which they live. How does it inform those?
Well, in a lot of ways, one of the things that we very, very much believe in House of True, and I think that all faiths believe this as a general rule, but because it's not segregated to one day of the week, it's not just something we do when we're at the Hof. We're very aware that we're House of True in how we present ourselves. Mm-hmm. We're House of True we're an House of True employee, we're an House of True employer, we're an House of True husband, an House of True father, an House of True brother. We're House of True no matter what we do in our life, so we're very aware of that and the implications of our actions on the House of True Folk Assembly, on our family directly, and in a bigger sense, it reflects on our gods. So we're really aware of that when we do things. Another thing is we embrace the world. We feel that the world is good and that we should accomplish and do. So we don't, I'll give the best way to put this. We don't look for our gods to do the things for us because we think that pride is a virtue in House of True. We want to stand proudly before the gods, being more worthy of standing in their presence. We want them to be proud of us. So we try to do good things to accomplish more. And with Sambal that I mentioned earlier, so much of what we do is about our legacy and about how we're remembered. So trying to do things worthy of being celebrated after we pass is a very important component to House of True. Mm-hmm. Culturally, I'd also say that we tend to embrace tradition in that sense because it was so important to our ancestors. With the extreme left today, they would have to believe, according to them, that everyone prior to their parents' generation were the most evil humans in the world. Yeah. And we don't believe that at all. I would hope that my, great, however many greats you want to go, grandfather would see what I'm doing and appreciate it in some way, or be proud of me, and be proud of the man I've become. And we're always aware of that in House of True.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also think the current Marxist push for those of us of Western European heritage to hate ourselves is a disgusting turn of events. In Christian terms, I would call it a sin. I don't know what you would call it in Al-Shatru, but I think it's destructive, and I think it does nothing to help the world as a whole. How would you view that particular topic?
Well, I'm trying to think of the Auster equivalent of a sin, and what we have is honorable things and dishonorable things. And I think that it's to disrespect your ancestors and disrespect those who've come before you is one of the heights of dishonor. And it is disgusting. And unfortunately, in the world that we live in today, certainly here in the United States, it's directed only at us, but not at other groups. It's embraced by these other groups. And I say that not negatively. I think that's fantastic for them. I just want to have the same rights and consideration and the same celebration of my ancestors.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't think that pride in one's ethnos, one's heritage, one's homeland and traditions and ancestors is somehow evil or wrong. I think it's good, and like you said, it's honorable. But even within Christian circles, there's this fear of the dreaded R word when it comes to that. And I think it's really a meaningless word in modern parlance. And I'm not afraid of the word. So I think we would agree on that, that we should be about preserving our heritage. And, I think there are three principles that inform my own spirituality, and they've broken down into faith, family, and tradition, all of those with capital letters. And I think that's really where you come from as well, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. A previous House True organization, their motto was faith, folk, family. And it, pretty much is exactly what you just said. Those components are so essential to what House of True is and to our existence within it. And I do think that's common amongst all our folk, no matter what religion they find themselves in. Those core values are traditionally so important to our people.
I also think it's there's an interesting connection. If we look at human history, there is an interesting connection between homeland, the land of our origin, and our faith and our culture. And that the further we have moved from our homelands or been removed from them, the quicker both family and culture begins to erode, especially if we introduce foreign elements into it that don't respect them. Would you say you would agree with that or disagree?
It depends. I think it's a double-edged sword on the first point. I think that you do you miss those touchstones and you don't have those ancient places that you're used to that have informed, our mythos. So much of our House of True mythos is written down in Scandinavia, and the stories revolve around that landscape, and it's harder to put yourself in that when you're in a different place, when you're across the world. But precisely because of that distance, it makes people that are further from their homelands try harder. It's something that in anthropology they call the zealotry of the fringe. So the further out the satellites of that root culture are, the more desperately they hang on to those traditions because that's all they have. And I think that happens. But your other point of when you infuse that culture with foreign elements, especially foreign elements that are hostile to it, yeah, it's very easy to wash that away, especially when people are far from their homeland.
Do you think there's such thing as ethnic memory?
Absolutely. In Austria, we call that the folk soul.
Okay. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. So as part of us individually, as individuals, we're connected, and a piece of all those who have come before us lives on within us and through us. So we're connected to our family line back to the beginning. Those parts of those memories, parts of that existence come to us in our very DNA. But because we have commonality and because we're all connected as part of this family, this folk family, we have this bigger folk soul that connects us all. We have a shared commonality, a shared ancestral memory, and also something. It's funny because one of the ways that we see the folk soul manifest is when seemingly spontaneously at different places, but at the same time, our people come to a similar understanding of something. Mm-hmm. When Alcatraz reawoke in late 1960s, there were 4 people very involved with it, all of whom in different parts of the world with no communication with one another, but all felt at that time that the need to reconnect with our gods was, the time is now to seize it.
Mm-hmm. There are times when I have watched videos on the history of the Anglo-Saxon peoples. My ancestors, I've done a significant amount of genealogy work and had the DNA tests, et cetera, done. And I'm definitely Anglo-Saxon. There are times when I watch films or TV programs on the history and et cetera, and they'll show ancient places associated with that history. And it awakens, I guess you would call it a yearning to return to that place or that country. Do you know what I mean? Is that
absolutely
part of this folk soul that you mentioned?
It is. It's part of that. It's part of your ancestral memory. It's part of your folk soul drawing you back to those things. And those places have power, especially if you see ancient holy places. These places have been used as ritual sites for sometimes thousands of years, and there's an immense power there. I've been fortunate. I've gone to Europe twice with the Austrian Folk Assembly, once to Denmark and once to Sweden, and I've been able to stand in these ancient stone circles and visit these dolmens, and it's hard to describe if you haven't felt it. But yeah, it's your folk soul's calling you home. You have an ancestral memory of that place and that power.
Mm-hmm. I've not visited any of those places, but there have been times when I've been in like a forest where you can feel there's something different about the place. It's not just what it looks like or that you're in a forest, but there's something different about the place. You just feel it. That's all. The only way I can express it. Is that what you're talking about? Is that same sort of?
Yeah, there's a power there, and you feel it in, we'll notice if you go into a room, or people have remarked when they visited our hofs, and we've only, been there for a year in 2 cases and 6 years in another case, but people can walk in and they feel there's a spiritual energy there. They feel that there's something in the room with them when they're there or when they're out in one of our ritual circles. Mm-hmm. So we absolutely believe in that.
Mm-hmm. And how long have you been involved with Alcatraz?
Since the early 2000s, I think since 2001.
Oh, so about 20 years. That's significant.
Yes, sir.
That's significant. You're a married man then?
I am.
Yeah. Children?
We've got just about 1 year old. She's 15 months a couple of days ago, my daughter, Aubrey.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great. I always love to hear when somebody's starting a new family. It's a beautiful thing. Are there a lot of families in the assembly?
Yes, it's overwhelming, and that's been a relatively new thing. But in the past 5 years, the families have been. We've had this baby boom within the AFA, and we've got so many kids. We can hardly go to any event anymore to where there's not only children but pregnant ladies, babies in arms, and kids all the way up into their teens.
Yeah, that's good to see, especially since they're discouraging birth. So, yeah, it's good to see. Do you have, really quickly here, we've probably got about 3 minutes left. Do you have family-specific rituals? I mean, beyond marriage, beyond matrimony, I mean, like in Christianity, there's christenings and things like that. Do you have similar things?
Yeah, and they come from a common root. So we have our baby namings when a child's born and they're 9 days old, And it's when you can get family and friends together, but traditionally 9 days old. We'll take them before the Gothi and assembled family and friends and affix their name to them. And by affixing their name to them, we're completing their soul at that point. We're giving them that component from our family to them and acknowledging them and accepting them as part of our family, as part of our group, and giving them that name that's very often passed out from their ancestors. Mm-hmm. So that's a real special one for us.
We've got about 2 minutes. Is there anything you want to say to our listeners?
Yeah, if you are an ethnically European person who is traditionally minded and interested, please check us out, www.runestone.org. Read up, see what we're about, and please feel free to contact anybody there if you find it interesting or if it speaks to you.
Are there any good books they can read?
Yeah, actually, our founder, Stephen McNallen, wrote Ausatru, A Native European Spirituality, and I think that's the best get to know about Ausatru in the modern sense. That's available on our website or certainly on Amazon or a number of places.
Fantastic. And if listeners didn't get that information, you can go to the KCORradio.com website, go to the Expedition Truth page down there toward the bottom, I think it is. You'll find a tab to click on Matthew Flavel's biography, and there are links to everything you're going to need there to make contact with the Ausatru Folk Assembly, including their YouTube channel. So, Matthew, thank you for being with us. And that's it for tonight's expedition.
You've been listening to Expedition Truth, hosted by Jack Ashcraft. It's time to believe in the unbelievable. Live every Thursday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Jack Ashcraft, the show, as well as his guests, please visit his website at www.paleoorthodoxy.com. Expedition Truth. Intelligent talk for the discerning mind. Why? Because the truth never fears questions.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.